I thought my birthday dinner would be the one night I finally felt appreciated. Instead, my daughter looked across the table, smiled, and told everyone I was paying for everything because I owed them. No discussion, no respect, just expectation. Years of sacrifice were reduced to a bill. As I sat there, surrounded by my own family, I realized I was no longer seen as a mother, only as a wallet. That was the moment something inside me broke. And instead of arguing, instead of crying, I stood up, left my own birthday dinner, and walked away from a life I had spent decades building for others. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. My name is Margaret Lawson, but everyone has always called me Maggie. I am 68 years old, and I live alone in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. My house is small but well kept, the kind of place that feels safe and familiar, filled with memories that never quite fade. Most mornings begin the same way. I make a cup of coffee, sit near the front window, and watch the world move on without me. 15 years ago, my husband died suddenly from a stroke. One moment we were planning a weekend trip, and the next I was standing in a hospital hallway, trying to understand how my life had changed so completely. At the time, our daughter Vanessa was in college, and our son Eric was still in high school. Grief was not a luxury I could afford. I became both parents overnight, carrying the weight of the family on my shoulders without complaint. I spent more than 40 years working as a senior accountant for a construction firm in Austin. Long hours, tight deadlines, endless spreadsheets. My job was demanding, but it paid the bills and kept my children secure. While other families took vacations or enjoyed quiet weekends, I often stayed late at the office, calculating budgets and managing contracts. My sacrifices were never about recognition. They were about stability. When Vanessa needed tuition money, I found a way. When Eric dreamed of opening his own gym, I invested in his vision. I helped with down payments, credit card balances, and unexpected expenses that always seemed to appear at the worst possible time. I told myself that this was what mothers did. We supported our children no matter the cost. Now that I am retired, my days move more slowly. The house is peaceful, sometimes too peaceful. I tend to my garden, read novels from the local library, and take long walks in the evening when the Texas heat finally softens. The quiet gives me time to think, though not all thoughts are comforting. My phone does not ring very often anymore. When it does, it is usually because someone needs something. A favor, a payment, a solution. I answer every call, of course. Old habits are hard to break. But I cannot help noticing that no one calls just to ask how I am doing. No one stops by for coffee without a reason. I still love my children deeply. That love has never faded, not even when disappointment settles in quietly beside it. I tell myself that they are busy, that life is complicated, that they do not mean to forget me. Yet some evenings, when the sun sets behind the trees and the house grows darker, I feel the weight of loneliness press against my chest. There was a time when this house was full of noise, laughter from the kitchen, music playing from Vanessa's room, Eric's footsteps racing down the hallway. Those sounds are memories now, echoes of a life that once felt full. Despite everything, I have never asked my children for anything. Not for money, not for help, not even for company. Independence has always been my shield, the one thing that reminds me I am still strong. As my birthday approached, I found myself hoping for something different. Not gifts or grand gestures, but acknowledgement. A moment where I could simply feel seen, not as a provider, not as a safety net, but as a mother who had given her entire life to her family. I did not know then that this birthday would change everything. If you're still watching and connecting with this story, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Things are about to shift in a way no one expected, and the warning signs are already there. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. 3 weeks before my birthday, my phone rang in the middle of a quiet afternoon. I had just finished watering the garden and was resting on the porch with a glass of iced tea when I saw Vanessa's name on the screen. Calls from her were rare these days, so I answered right away, feeling a small spark of anticipation. Her voice sounded unusually bright. She told me she had planned something special for my birthday. A dinner, she said, at Longhorn Prime Steakhouse in downtown Austin. The way she said the name made it sound grand, almost celebratory. She spoke quickly, confidently, as if everything had already been arranged. I noticed she never asked whether I wanted to go. She simply informed me. For a moment, I did not mind. The idea that my daughter had thought about my birthday at all felt comforting. I had grown used to quiet holidays and low-key celebrations, usually spent alone with a slice of cake and a phone call or two. This sounded different. This sounded like effort. Longhorn Prime Steakhouse was not a place I would normally choose for myself. I had passed it many times over the years, always noticing the valet stand, the polished windows, the elegant crowd. It was the kind of restaurant people visited to celebrate big achievements or important milestones. I had never gone inside. Spending that kind of money on one meal had never felt practical to me, even when I could afford it. Still, the thought of sitting in a beautiful restaurant with my family made something warm stir in my chest. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year, I would not be the one arranging everything. Maybe I could simply show up and enjoy the evening. As Vanessa continued talking, she mentioned the guest list. She had invited Eric, his wife, the children, and a few other relatives. It sounded like a full table. She seemed proud of how organized she was, listing details about reservations and timing. Yet something about the conversation felt slightly off. There was no mention of what the evening was meant to be about. No mention of celebrating me, my life, or even my age. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the quiet street in front of my house. A part of me felt grateful. Another part felt cautious, though I could not explain why. I had spent so many years putting my children first that questioning their intentions felt almost wrong. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking more about the dinner. I wondered what I would wear, what the restaurant would look like inside, what it would feel like to have everyone gathered around me for once. I imagined sitting at the table, listening to stories, feeling included instead of needed. But there were small details that continued to bother me. Vanessa never asked about my preferences. She did not ask what kind of food I liked, what time felt comfortable for me, or whether I wanted something simple or extravagant. Everything had already been decided. I told myself not to overthink it. I reminded myself that my daughter was busy, that organizing anything took effort, and that I should appreciate what she had done. I wanted to believe that this dinner was an act of kindness, not convenience. As my birthday grew closer, I chose a modest outfit from my closet. Nothing flashy, just something comfortable and neat. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and tried to imagine the evening ahead. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to hope that I would feel truly celebrated. I had no idea that the night would leave me feeling more invisible than ever. If you're still here and feeling that something is not quite right, comment number 2 below so I know you're following closely. The celebration is about to turn into something far more painful than anyone imagined. Now, let's move on to chapter 3. Longhorn Prime Steakhouse was brighter and louder than I had imagined. The entrance glowed with warm lighting, and the scent of grilled steak hung in the air. Well-dressed couples filled the dining room, their laughter blending with the clinking of glasses. I paused for a moment at the door, smoothing the front of my blouse, reminding myself that this evening was supposed to be about celebrating another year of my life. Vanessa had already arrived with Eric, his wife, and the children. Our table was large, set near the center of the room. Balloons were tied to the back of one chair, and a small stack of gift bags rested near the edge of the table. Everyone looked relaxed, chatting easily among themselves. When they saw me, a few quick smiles appeared, followed by polite greetings. I took my seat, feeling strangely like a guest at my own birthday dinner. The conversation flowed around me, mostly about work, school schedules, and weekend plans. No one asked how I was feeling or what I had been doing lately. I told myself not to read too much into it. A server approached and handed out menus. The leather covers felt heavy in my hands, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine that I was simply here to enjoy the meal, nothing more. That illusion shattered quickly. Vanessa laughed and said, "Mom's paying for this. She owes us." The words hit me harder than I expected. For a few seconds, I could not even respond. I felt every pair of eyes at the table turn in my direction, not with curiosity, but with expectation. The server hesitated, pen hovering in the air, waiting for confirmation. I searched for a hint of humor in Vanessa's expression, some sign that she was joking. There was none. Before I could speak, Eric began studying the menu with enthusiasm, pointing out the most expensive steak options. Vanessa asked about premium wine. The children debated dessert choices as if the decision had already been made. No one looked at me for approval. A tight pressure formed in my chest. I realized that this dinner was not a gift. It was a transaction, one I had never agreed to. I glanced around the table, taking in the familiar faces that had once depended on me for guidance, comfort, and protection. Now, they seemed to depend on me for something else entirely. My role had shifted from mother to financier without my consent. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background as my thoughts raced. I remembered every late night at the office, every skipped vacation, every sacrifice I had made so my children could live comfortably. None of those choices had come with the promise that I would owe them for the rest of my life. The server waited patiently, but the silence at our table grew heavier. I felt my face warm with embarrassment. Nearby diners continued their conversations, unaware of the quiet tension unfolding just a few feet away. I closed my menu and placed it on the table. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm, though my hands trembled slightly. I said that I had not agreed to pay for everyone's meals. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Eric shrugged, as if this were a minor inconvenience. The children looked confused, sensing the shift in mood. In that moment, I understood something clearly for the first time. This dinner was not about celebrating me. It was about what I could still provide. I sat there, surrounded by family, feeling more invisible than I had ever felt in my own home. The decorations, the laughter, and the expensive menu meant nothing when the respect I hoped for was nowhere to be found. The evening that was meant to honor me had turned into a quiet reminder of how easily I was taken for granted. If you're still watching, and that moment shocked you as much as it shocked me, comment number 3 below to stay with the story. Because what happens next crosses a line that can never be uncrossed. Now, let's move on to chapter 4. The moment I said I was not paying for everyone, the mood at the table shifted. What had felt like a casual family gathering turned tense and uncomfortable. The soft background music and cheerful voices from nearby tables only made the silence at ours feel heavier. Vanessa leaned back in her chair with a tight smile, while Eric stared at his menu as if nothing unusual had happened. Vanessa finally broke the silence, her tone light but dismissive. She reminded me that I had always paid for family dinners before, as if that made it an unspoken rule. Eric added that I rarely spent money on myself, implying that this was just another harmless expense. Neither of them acknowledged the fact that no one had asked me beforehand. I kept my voice steady. I explained that I had not agreed to cover the entire bill and that I would have appreciated being consulted first. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply stated how I felt. Their reactions made it clear that my feelings were not their priority. Vanessa sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. Eric shrugged, his attention already drifting back to the menu. Around us, other families laughed and clinked glasses, completely unaware of the quiet conflict unfolding at our table. I reached into my purse, partly out of habit, partly to calm my nerves. As my fingers brushed against my wallet and phone, something caught my attention. A notification from my bank sat unread on the screen. Curious and uneasy, I opened it. There it was, a charge from Longhorn Prime Steakhouse, marked as a reservation deposit. The amount was not small. My stomach tightened as I realized what it meant. I had never approved that payment. Vanessa had access to a secondary card linked to my account, something I had given her years ago for emergencies. She had used it to secure the reservation without asking me. For a moment, the sounds of the restaurant faded. All I could hear was the quiet rush of blood in my ears. This was not just about money anymore. It was about trust. I looked at Vanessa, searching her face for some sign of guilt or hesitation. There was none. To her, this was normal, convenient, acceptable. The realization hurt more than I expected. I had spent decades teaching my children about responsibility, honesty, and respect. Yet here I was, discovering that my own daughter had crossed a boundary without a second thought. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an accident. This was a decision. I felt a mixture of shock and disappointment settle in my chest. It was one thing to assume I would pay. It was another to take my money without my consent. I did not cause a scene. I did not accuse her loudly in front of the children or the staff. I simply sat there, absorbing the truth I could no longer ignore. The line had been crossed, and then it had not just been stepped over. It had been erased. In that moment, I began to see my role in the family differently. I was not being appreciated for who I was, only for what I could provide. My generosity had slowly turned into an expectation, and my silence had been mistaken for permission. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The anger would come later. Right now, all I felt was clarity. This dinner was not a celebration of my life. It was a reminder of how easily my boundaries had been ignored. And for the first time in many years, I knew I could not pretend otherwise. If you're still here and feeling the tension rising, comment number 4 below, so I know you're with me. The next chapter is where everything finally explodes. Now, let's move on to chapter 5. The tension at our table had grown so thick that it felt heavier than the air in the restaurant. Vanessa and Eric continued flipping through their menus, speaking casually to the children as if nothing had happened. Their calm only made the situation more unbearable. I sat there quietly, my hands folded in my lap, watching the scene unfold as though I were no longer part of it. Inside, something had shifted. The shock I felt earlier was giving way to clarity. For years, I had brushed off small signs of entitlement, convincing myself that my children still respected me, even if they did not always show it. But this moment left no room for doubt. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement caught the attention of the server and a few nearby diners. My heart was pounding, but my voice remained steady. I said that I would not be paying for the dinner, not tonight, and not anymore. The words hung in the air, quiet but firm. Vanessa's face tightened instantly. She accused me of being dramatic, of embarrassing the family in public. Her voice rose as she reminded me of how much I had worked during her childhood, how often I had been absent, how money had always been my solution to everything. To her, this was not about respect, it was about resentment. Eric followed her lead, making a sharp comment about how money could fix plenty of problems if I was willing to use it. His tone was dismissive, as though my feelings were nothing more than an inconvenience. Around us, the restaurant seemed to pause. Conversations at nearby tables slowed, and the soft clatter of silverware became more noticeable. The server stood frozen, unsure whether to take orders or step away. I looked at my children, really looked at them, and felt a deep ache in my chest. These were the same people I had once held close during storms, illnesses, and heartbreak. Yet now they saw me only as a source of financial support, not as a person with limits, needs, and dignity. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small bill, just enough to cover the tea I had ordered. I placed it neatly on the table. My hands were steady, even though my chest felt tight. Without raising my voice or arguing further, I turned away from the table. I did not wait for a response. I did not look back. As I walked through the dining room, the noise slowly returned to normal. Laughter resumed, glasses clinked, and conversations carried on as if nothing unusual had happened. For everyone else, it was just another evening out. For me, it was the end of something I had held on to for far too long. The warm night air hit my face as I stepped outside. The valet stand was busy, and cars pulled in and out of the parking area. I stood there for a moment, breathing in deeply, letting the reality of what I had just done sink in. I had walked away from my own birthday dinner. The thought was painful, but it also brought an unexpected sense of relief. I was no longer pretending. I was no longer silently accepting behavior that hurt me. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself over expectation. As I drove home, the city lights blurred past my windshield. My phone buzzed in my purse, but I did not reach for it. I already knew what the messages would say. That night, my house felt quieter than usual, but it also felt honest. There were no decorations, no gifts, no forced smiles. Just me, my thoughts, and the truth I could no longer ignore. My birthday had not been a celebration of my life. It had become the moment I finally reclaimed it. The house felt unusually quiet when I returned home that night. The familiar creak of the front door and the soft hum of the refrigerator were the only sounds to greet me. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the evening settle in. My birthday had ended without cake, without candles, and without celebration. My phone vibrated almost immediately. Then again and again. I did not need to look to know who it was. Vanessa and Eric. Their messages arrived in a steady stream, filling the screen with frustration and blame. They accused me of embarrassing them in public, of ruining what was supposed to be a family celebration. Not one message asked how I was feeling. Not one expressed concern for my emotions or my dignity. I read them all in silence, my chest tightening with each new notification. There were no apologies, only explanations and justifications. To them, my refusal to pay was the problem, not their entitlement. I placed the phone face down on the counter and made myself a cup of tea. The routine helped calm my nerves, but my thoughts refused to settle. I replayed the scene in my mind, the way Vanessa had spoken, the way Eric had shrugged, the way the children had watched in confusion. This was not just about dinner anymore. It was about years of being taken for granted. The next morning, a call from my bank pulled me out of my thoughts. The representative spoke politely, confirming details about a loan connected to a local fitness business. According to their records, I was listed as the financial guarantor. My hands began to tremble. I had never agreed to guarantee any loan for Eric's gym. I had helped him with startup costs years ago, but I had been very clear about my limits. The representative explained that my signature was on the paperwork. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall in disbelief. Someone had forged my name. The realization felt colder than anything I had experienced the night before. This was not emotional manipulation. This was legal misconduct. For the first time, fear replaced disappointment. My financial security, the stability I had worked my entire life to build, was at risk. I did not cry. I did not panic. Instead, I opened my laptop and searched for a local attorney who specialized in financial disputes. Within minutes, I scheduled a consultation. As I wrote down the appointment time, something inside me shifted. The woman who had spent decades fixing problems quietly and privately was no longer willing to absorb the consequences of other people's choices. That afternoon, I reviewed my financial documents. I looked at my savings, my property records, and the will I had written years earlier, back when I believed my children would always treat me with respect. Everything I owned was set to go to him. The thought no longer felt right. Trust had been broken, not by one careless moment, but by a pattern of behavior that had finally crossed a line. I made another call, this time to the law office that handled estate planning. I requested an appointment to revise my will. My voice was calm, my decision steady. I was not acting out of anger. I was acting out of self-preservation. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on my porch and watched the sky turn shades of orange and purple. For years, I had defined myself by what I gave to others. Now, I was learning how to protect what remained. My children had made their choices. Now, I was making mine. If you're still watching and realizing how serious this situation has become, comment number 6 below to show your support. The consequences are about to unfold, and nothing will ever be the same again. Now, let's move on to Chapter 7. The knock on my front door came 3 days after my meeting with the lawyer. It was sharp and impatient, the kind that demanded immediate attention. I did not need to look through the window to know who it was. The tension from our last encounter still lingered in the air, and my instincts told me this visit would not be a peaceful one. When I opened the door, Vanessa and Eric stood on the porch, their expressions rigid and determined. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them asked how I was doing. They walked inside without waiting for an invitation, as if my home were still an extension of their own. The living room felt smaller with their presence. Their frustration filled the space, pressing against the quiet I had grown used to. Vanessa wasted no time. She accused me of making reckless financial decisions, of letting strangers influence me, of putting the family at risk. Her voice carried the same sharp edge I had heard at the restaurant. Eric echoed her concerns, though his tone was more controlled. He insisted that I was being misled, that I was not thinking clearly, and that someone needed to step in before I caused irreversible damage. I listened without interrupting. Years of professional experience had taught me the value of patience, even in uncomfortable conversations. But this was different. This was not about contracts or budgets. This was about my autonomy. They began talking about my savings, my property, and my will. To them, my finances were not personal. They were a shared asset, something that belonged to the family as a whole. The implication was clear. My money was not truly mine anymore. That realization settled heavily in my chest. I told them calmly that my financial decisions were my own. I reminded them that I was capable of managing my affairs and that I had sought legal advice to ensure everything was handled properly. Vanessa's frustration grew. She insisted that I was being unreasonable, that I was pushing them away, that I was damaging the family by refusing to cooperate. The word cooperate lingered in my mind. It sounded less like a request and more like a demand. I took a deep breath and spoke the truth I had been holding back for years. I told them that what they wanted was not a mother, but a source of financial support. I explained that my love had been mistaken for obligation and my generosity for entitlement. The room fell silent. Eric looked down at the floor, his jaw clenched, Vanessa's face flushed with anger. Neither of them responded with understanding. Instead, their disappointment hardened into resentment. They told me that if I chose to continue down this path, I should not expect their support in the future. They made it clear that the holidays, family gatherings, and even simple visits would no longer include me. I did not argue. I did not plead. I simply nodded, acknowledging the consequences they had chosen to set. When they left, the door closed with a finality that echoed through the house. The familiar quiet returned, but it felt different this time. Heavier, more permanent. I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by furniture that had witnessed decades of family life. Birthdays, graduations, late-night conversations, and quiet moments of comfort had all unfolded within these walls. Now the space felt like a reminder of what had been lost. The sadness came slowly, settling in my chest like a gentle ache rather than a sharp pain. I did not regret my decision, but I mourned the relationship I had hoped to have with my children. That evening, I sat by the window as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky faded from gold to deep blue, and the streetlights flickered on one by one. My life had grown quieter, but it had also grown clearer. I had chosen honesty over convenience, and with that choice came both peace and loss. The days after my children stopped visiting felt strangely empty at first. The house was quieter than it had ever been, and the silence pressed against me in unfamiliar ways. For years, even when we disagreed, there had always been the expectation that someone would call, show up, or ask for something. Now, the phone stayed still on the kitchen counter, and I had no one to wait for. Instead of letting the quiet overwhelm me, I began to reshape my routine. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center, something I had always been curious about but never made time for. My hands, so used to paperwork and household chores, learned to shape clay into simple bowls and uneven cups. It was not about perfection. It was about creating something just for myself. On other mornings, I walked to the local library and spent hours wandering through the aisles, choosing novels and memoirs that had nothing to do with the family obligations or practical concerns. In the evenings, I took slow walks through the neighborhood, letting the warm Texas air settle my thoughts. For the first time in years, my time belonged to me. That was when I began spending more time with Helen, the widowed neighbor who lived 2 houses down. She was kind, observant, and never rushed our conversations. We would sit on our porches in the late afternoon, watching the sun sink behind the trees while talking about everything from gardening to old movies. One evening, as the sky faded into soft shades of pink and gold, our conversation turned towards the family. Helen mentioned that she had met Vanessa once, months earlier, when my daughter had stopped by the neighborhood looking for me. Helen hesitated before continuing. She explained that Vanessa had asked her questions about how older homeowners sometimes transferred property to relatives or close friends. The questions were not casual. They were detailed, focused on persuasion rather than process. The words settled heavily in my chest. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not poor communication. This was planning. I thanked Helen for being honest with me. She squeezed my hand gently, her expression filled with quiet sympathy. She did not offer advice or judgment. She simply listened. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the soft glow of a lamp casting long shadows across the walls. I thought about every conversation, every assumption, every moment I had brushed aside because I wanted to believe my children's intentions were good. The truth was painful, but it was also freeing. I had not imagined the pattern. I had not overreacted. I had finally seen clearly. With that clarity came a sense of peace I had not felt in years. The guilt that once followed every boundary I set began to fade. I no longer felt responsible for fixing problems that were not mine to solve. My life started to feel fuller in quieter ways. I shared coffee with Helen in the mornings. I laughed with classmates in the pottery studio. I lost track of time while reading on my back porch. These moments did not depend on obligation or expectation. They existed simply because I allowed myself to enjoy them. The loneliness did not disappear completely, but it changed shape. It became something I could sit with rather than something that controlled me. I missed my children, but I no longer chased their attention or approval. I had spent decades defining myself through sacrifice. Now, I was learning to define myself through choice. As the weeks passed, I stopped looking at my phone so often. I stopped wondering when the next call would come. Instead, I focused on the quiet victories of each day. Peace did not arrive loudly. It arrived gently, through acceptance, and for the first time in a very long while, my future felt like something I was choosing, not something I was enduring. If you're still here and feeling the emotional weight of this journey, comment number 8 below to let me know you're ready for the final chapter. The ending carries a powerful message you will not want to miss. The final paperwork was signed on a quiet Tuesday morning. The law office smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, and the atmosphere felt calm, almost comforting. I reviewed every document carefully, making sure my intentions were clear and legally protected. The fraudulent loan guarantee connected to Eric's gym was officially removed from my name, and my revised will was now in place. When I walked out of the building, the sun was bright, and the air felt lighter than it had in months. For the first time in a long while, my future felt secure again. I had chosen to redirect my legacy. Instead of leaving everything to people who saw my life's work as an entitlement, I created something meaningful. I established a scholarship fund for women over 50 who wanted to return to school or learn new skills. I knew how difficult it could be to rebuild your life later in adulthood, and I wanted to help others find the confidence I had nearly lost. My home, the place where I had raised my children and shared countless memories, would one day belong to a local senior support center. The organization provided housing and resources for elderly residents who had no family to rely on. The thought of my house becoming a place of comfort for others felt right. I did not forget my grandchildren. They were innocent in all of this. I made sure they would still receive financial support in the future, but with clear conditions focused on education, responsibility, and personal growth. My love for them remained unchanged, even if my relationship with their parents had faded. Weeks passed without a single call from Vanessa or Eric. There were no holiday messages, no updates, no attempts to reconnect. The silence hurt at times, but it also confirmed what I had already accepted. Our relationship had been built on expectations, not understanding. My days became steady and predictable in the best way. I attended pottery classes, shared meals with Helen, and volunteered at the community center's reading program. I felt useful again, but not in the way I used to. This time, my value was not measured by how much money I could provide. There were moments when memories surfaced unexpectedly. A song on the radio, a familiar restaurant sign, or a child's laughter in the distance could still bring a quiet ache to my chest. But the ache no longer controlled me. I allowed myself to feel it, then let it pass. I had spent decades putting everyone else first. Now, my priorities were different. My peace mattered. My independence mattered. My voice mattered. I no longer felt guilty for setting boundaries. I no longer felt responsible for fixing problems that were not mine to solve. Standing on my back porch one evening, watching the sky turn shades of amber and violet, I realized how far I had come. I was not the same woman who had walked into that birthday dinner filled with quiet hope. I was stronger now, clearer, and finally free to live on my own terms. Most evenings now, I sit on the front porch with a cup of warm tea and watch the sky change colors as the sun sets over our quiet street. The neighborhood has its own rhythm, slow and steady, like a heartbeat I have finally learned to listen to. There are no loud conversations, no urgent phone calls, and no expectations waiting for me inside the house. Only peace. Sometimes my thoughts drift back to that birthday dinner, to the moment when I realized how invisible I had become in my own family. I remember the weight of the silence at the table, the way my words seemed to matter less than the bill in my wallet. At the time, the pain felt unbearable. Now, I see that night for what it truly was. It was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of my clarity. For most of my life, I believed that love meant sacrifice without limits. I believed that being a good mother required endless giving, even when it left me feeling empty. I convinced myself that my needs could always come second. But over time, that way of living cost me more than I realized. It cost me my voice, my boundaries, and my sense of self. Walking away from that dinner was not easy. Letting go of the version of motherhood I had carried for decades was even harder. Yet in choosing to protect myself, I discovered something important. Love does not grow from obligation. It grows from respect. I no longer measure my worth by what I can provide. I measure it by how I feel when I wake up in the morning, by the quiet confidence that settles in my chest when I make choices for myself. I have learned that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of care, both for myself and for those around me. Loneliness still visits from time to time, but it no longer feels like a threat. It feels like a gentle reminder that I am independent, capable, and whole. I fill my days with small joys, morning walks, friendly conversations, creative projects, and long hours spent reading in the afternoon light. These moments may seem simple, but they carry more meaning than any expensive dinner ever could. If there is one lesson my journey has taught me, it is this. No one is owed your sacrifice, not your time, not your money, not your peace. Relationships should be built on care, not entitlement. And family should be a place of comfort, not pressure. I am still a mother. I always will be. But I am also a woman who deserves to be seen, heard, and respected. As the last light fades from the sky, I take a deep breath and smile to myself. My life is quieter now, but it is also honest. I no longer live to meet expectations that were never fair to begin with. I live for myself. And in doing so, I have finally found the freedom I did not know I was missing. Some moments in life force us to confront uncomfortable truths about love, loyalty, and self-worth. We give, we sacrifice, and we hope that our efforts will be met with appreciation. But real respect is never something that can be bought, demanded, or assumed. It grows from understanding, boundaries, and mutual care. Learning to protect your peace does not mean you love less. It means you finally love yourself enough to stand firm in your values. Every person deserves to feel seen, heard, and honored for who they are, not just for what they provide. Thank you for taking the time to experience this story. If it resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more meaningful stories that explore real emotions, real struggles, and real strength.